Wednesday for the conversation. We're making our way through the letters of change. Today we have landed on N. From last week to this week, we have discovered that, in fact, N stands for now. And we're going to talk a bit about now, being connected to the present moment. Maybe you remember, but Jesus spends an awful lot of time around this concept of being present to the present moment. Mm-hmm. Maybe the most familiar phrase that rings for us is when Jesus says something like, the kingdom of heaven is now, or the kingdom of heaven is at hand, or the kingdom of heaven is in our midst, like it is between us, pushing us into the sense that God is active and creative, creating in the present moment. We might also remember that there's a pretty heavy dose of teaching that also comes around pushing aside those things that take us out of the present moment. We remember that he said, has any of you ever added an hour to your life by worrying? This idea of consider the lilies of the field, or like, don't worry. And we have that sense that when we have that worry or that anxiety, we're really oriented toward the future, but not the present moment. So Jesus pushing us, encouraging us to stay present to the present moment. What we also know is that the wisdom about staying present to the present moment is not exclusively Christian. It really weaves its way through many faith traditions. Probably the one that we know the most about in the West, 2021, Jackson, is Buddhism's focus on mindfulness, staying present to the present moment, peace with every footfall, connecting to our breath, appreciating when we put the berry into our mouth and all the reactions that causes from us. So we know that the wisdom of being connected to the now is not just Christian. It's also not just religious. There are a lot of spiritual communities that have embraced this concept of this wisdom of tying ourselves to the present moment. I'm thinking about two in my mind right now. I'm thinking about sort of the American yoga community and the focus that we have on the breath. It's not just about poses. It's not just about physical fitness, but it's about a spiritual practice of being present with our bodies, with our immediate context, present without judgment, open. Another way of describing it. I'm thinking about the wisdom from the recovery community of one day at a time. This is how we take our sobriety. We take it one day at a time. I don't know about yesterday. I don't know about tomorrow, but for today, I'm okay. Yeah, that's fine. So and then I think it's also important to talk a bit about how neuroscience has begun to really reach into this spiritual, religious tradition and study it, first as observers. Oh, what's going on here in that monk's brain when he commits himself to a contemplative practice? Like, let's put him into the fMRI machine and see what happens. See what happens over time when people adopt constructed, intentional practices that are contemplative or mindful. I love the idea that, and I should also say that neuroscience is no longer an observer there, right? That community has fully embraced these practices, has done enough research and enough study to have a sense that not only do these practices of being attentive to the present moment, being connected to the now, not only do they reduce stress in our lives, but they also help us be attentive. They help increase our attention spans. We have great organizations here in Jackson, like Becoming Jackson Whole, who's devoted to bringing these practices to our community through that lens of neuroscience and practice, knowing that if we were to spread that kind of practice around our community, that it would increase well-being and human flourishing. So we have a little sense of how our particular religious tradition focuses on the now, and we also have an understanding that there are other religious and spiritual and scientific communities that are focusing on that. So my question to you is, what do you make of that? How do you bring the now into your own life? How do you embody the present moment with attention, without judgment? What are you thinking? What are you feeling?
Before we go there, one of the things that I've been thinking about this week around now and change, you referenced this a little bit. Fear and anxiety are about something in the future that we are afraid is going to happen. And when we talk about change, and the common wisdom is that we're all afraid of change, that people don't accept change readily. But if you are grounded in the present moment, change doesn't have that same sense of you don't have that same sense of fear around change because you are living it and you are experiencing it. It is just what is happening in that moment. So I think it's a particularly important concept in the framework of change, right? That we are not living out of fear of what might be different tomorrow, but we're living in this present moment, and everything actually in the present moment is change.
Yeah.
Right? We're constantly, from one moment to the next is different. And so I think it's a really interesting concept to be looking at and thinking about.
And conversely, if we're looking backward into the past, we have those depressive feelings.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. The other piece of that is my initial instinct when I think about practices is it's so easy to have a practice and say, okay, I'm done with that, and now I'm moving on with my life, right?
Now I can become anxious again.
Right. So I spent my 10 minutes of mindfulness this morning, and now I'm just going to, and I like the neuroscience of it because it does tell us that we are actually building that muscle so that we can continue to be present, more present in the moment as we go into our lives. But it has to be a conscious choice as well. It's very easy to sort of compartmentalize things. This is my time for being mindful, and now I'm at work and I'm doing this thing, and now I'm with my kids and doing that thing. But if we can take that experience and try to live that through our day-to-day life, then we do become that less anxious presence, and we can ideally be more mindful, not to the point where you're shut down and just truly being mindful, but that becomes a more part of your being in the world.
Yeah, the practices become this tether to our attentive experience of the world around us, so that we might have a ski run that is tied to the present moment and helps ground us and helps connect us. And at the same time, what is so obvious to us when we're skiing down a slope, especially a challenging one, is that we're constantly changing. Right?
Yeah.
Like we are constantly changing our position. It's a very dynamic sport, just as our lives are dynamic in the world.
And my experience has been, if I try to think my way down that mountain, I'm not going to make it.
So I get into trouble.
Yeah, well, I will get into trouble because, like many of the movements that we make through life, I think it's a mistake to think of mindfulness as some sort of rational way of thinking our way through things, right?
Yeah.
To me, that's not what mindfulness is. Right? What success that I have with any sort of mindfulness practice is really just, it's not 10 minutes in the morning and 10 minutes at night as as much as it is paying attention, remembering to really pay attention to what is going on. You know, not just around me, but also what is going on inside me as, well, in this moment. Like as I sit here, you know, conversing with you guys, rather than trying to figure out what I'm going to say next, really paying
Being
attention
present, yep.
to what you all are saying.
Yeah.
You know, and that is, if I have any mindfulness practice at all, that's what it is just trying to pay attention as I go about my day. Trying to stay curious, for one, and not too convinced that I know what's going on and running my own tape in my head all the time, but really being curious about what's going on here right now and what's going on out there in the world. So, you know, mindfulness isn't, and the now, I posed this question to you guys this morning when we were talking about that. If we're staying in the now, does that mean that we're only staying in this room?
At least for now.
For now. for now. But when we leave this room, you know, and we go out into the world, you know, that's the challenge, isn't it? How can we be present and attentive and curious? How can we stay in that sort of a dynamic?
Yeah.
It's interesting, you know, I've done courses on listening. And when you talk about listening, that truly listening is being present in the moment for that person. And as you were talking, I was really working hard to just listen, because the instinct is always coming up with the thing you're going to say next.
Right.
Especially in a context like this when we're being filmed.
There are other distractions.
And what if I go
too,
blank?
Right.
And I don't have anything clever to say? And so you're constantly, but being totally present in that moment and hearing what you're saying is a practice, right?
It is.
The other thing I was thinking about, and I'm sure you've all had this experience, whether it's skiing down the hill. For me, I like to go out hiking, and you're halfway through a hike, and all of a sudden you realize, I have not been paying any attention. Like, oh my gosh, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And it just hits you. And then those are, maybe that's the point you get to, like, I've let go of all of that stuff that's been spinning in my head, and now I'm fully present here. And suddenly it hits me, I was not at all up until this moment, right? And that's
one of my favorite practices in that regard is when I move from the inside to the outside, I try to look up at the sky, whether it's day or night or somewhere in between. And it's such a grounding experience. And it just, the dread of the past, the fear of the future evacuates your mind as your gaze lifts up to the stars or to the clouds or to the bright blue sky. And it's funny how simple those practices are, how effective they are, but how challenging it is to continue to maintain them in the busyness of our lives.
I think having little tricks, as it were, to do that, to just remind you, whatever it might be that works for you, a little icon of some sort on your dashboard or something on your mirror or the sky above you, to just continually, oh, that's right. Bring it back and ground you in that way. Those are helpful.
Yeah.
And we say grounded, right? And
Back to humility.
back to humility.
Right.
And back to incarnate.
Yeah.
Back to the body. You know, if I can remember to come back to this body in this place, in this moment, then I can return to myself. Then I can return to my true self.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that's what Jesus was brilliant at doing too. You know, always returning to his humanity.
Especially as it relates one to another.
Yeah.
That,
Yeah.
he does do he has a solid practice of solitude
Sure.
that restores him for the work of connecting in the present moment with those who are around him, whether they are his disciples or whether there's a new character on the scene of, oh, there's someone who's ill who needs my attention. Here is a bereft parent who needs to be heard and then attended to at the loss of a child. Or there's so many stories.
And here is a scribe and a Pharisee that I need to relate to in my humanity to their humanity.
Right.
Even if I don't like what they're saying.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, I think about Jesus and the fully human, the fully divine, and when you were speaking, it struck me how interesting it is that in order to a spiritual practice, and in order to get really in touch with our spiritual side, we have to be fully embodied. You know, the yoga practice is about breathing in and being in your body, and how intertwined, like we are.
The closer you get to full humanity, the closer you get to full divinity.
Yes.
Which he says, like, he also says, the kingdom of heaven is within.
Yes.
Right? It's here.
And you know, we often talk about, well, we should be more aware and more in touch with our feelings. Often those feelings are really what we're thinking in our head, our emotions, but we feel with the body.
Yeah.
So what is your feeling? Okay, well, where is that?
Right.
Right? What am I truly feeling as a fully embodied soul?
Which is so, as you're saying, yes. Like when you're feeling truly loving, it is coming from here.
Yep.
Anxiety is coming from here.
Yep.
When you get a little emotional with sadness, you're feeling it. You know, there's different parts in your body that literally
Feel.
Yeah, we were talking just yesterday about watching The Hate You Give. All of us watched it separately. All of us made mention of like, wow, lots of tears during that movie. Isn't that such an interesting response to a feeling? What, water comes out of our eyes? It's so normative, but it's so strange.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, we struggle to catch our breath in a sob.
Oh, yeah.
Like we're not connected in that way, but we are embodied.
And if I'm feeling a little anxious, it's somewhere between my chest and my stomach. It's right here. It's there before it's here.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that is where maybe we can meet the now in the most immediate way.
And when we are, you know, if we look at mindfulness, that idea of being present to the present moment without judgment. So part of the practice is not just being attentive to the things that are going well, right? It's also not rejecting our failure or our physical discomfort or our spiritual dis-ease. It's really about accepting life along its fullest spectrum or expression and attaching to it in some way.
Without attaching to it.
Right. I was just thinking about that. Yeah. The non-attachment kind of attachment.
Exactly.
Right? You know what I mean.
Yeah,
You know what I
right,
mean. Right.
I think what I'll take away from this is the statement that you made, is the deeper that we are embodied in our humanity, the closer we are to our divinity. That's
Yeah,
kind of
there's something
genius
to
in
that
Yeah, there sure
practice
is.
there, isn't there? Yeah. One more thing that I want to bring up just for fun that comes to mind. What about the like ring, ring, ding, ding, ping, ping of our culture these days? Where does that, is it just a burden that we have to practice our way into living with? I noticed that each of us dropped our phone before we came to sit here.
Yep.
I didn't do that really consciously, other than like, well, I don't want you to see it in my pocket, I guess.
I
But
did
there
it out
is-
of the same fear that I do it every Sunday, that I'm going to forget and it's going to ring in the middle of this.
right. Well, I think that's when I started out talking about the 10-minute practice. It is so easy to do the 10-minute practice and then get back into that.
Yeah.
Because that's the world we live in. That always on, always connected. I think about that with my kids. No one comes to, we're just starting to come to church, right? But my kids are not inclined at this point in their lives to come to church.
Yours too.
Right.
Oh, good.
And
I'm not alone here.
That I think about the Taizé movement, right? That here is not a youth movement, but is a youth movement because there's something in that in which kids innately crave a connection, not to one another, but to something, to themselves and to something more powerful, that the gift that we could give them if they were open to it is that moment of being connected to God and to be present in the moment. Kids are never not connect to each other.
Yeah.
That's got to be exhausting.
The technology brings a complexity to our lives that is sometimes unwanted and unhelpful. And I like when I'm listening to you and remembering the experience of Taizé, it's simplicity, not complexity.
Right.
And that we're back to that grounding in the present moment, breathing, a little darkness, some candlelight, some music, but repetitive music, a thoughtful tidbit of wisdom, and then a lot of silence, like more silence than spoken wisdom.
Right. But there's a reason that is a youth movement.
Yeah.
Because it's so necessary. And I remember sitting there, and I think Adele came with me one time and sitting there thinking, when do these kids have time in their lives to listen for the voice of God?
Yeah.
Right? When do any of us?
Yeah, I don't think it's only the kids.
No.
I mean, from my personal experience, it actually takes discipline for me to turn off the phone when I get home and not turn it on again until I get up in the morning. I rarely succeed at that, quite frankly. So, yeah, ring, ring, ding, ding, ping, ping all the time, I think is exhausting. And I think that, and yet, a little seductive.
Yeah.
You know?
So
Yes.
I'm sitting here listening to you two, and I don't want to put words into your mouth, but are you really saying that church, like coming to church on a Sunday morning, is not about that 11th commandment? Like everybody knows God wants you to come to church. No, but it's about experiencing some ancient practices that retether us one to another, to God and to the earth or the embodied faith. Like, dare I say that communion behind us here is not only something that happens on the vertical axis, but something that also is shared in the moment and across the horizontal.
And on the ground,
Yeah.
grounded, in our bodies, eating,
Well,
sharing a meal.
talked a little bit about this earlier, that I think for me, liturgy, because I was raised in this tradition, it has this way of bringing me instantly to that moment. Like, that's the beauty of it. If it's new to you, it may take a while to sort of get there. Maybe it doesn't work in that way for you. But for me, it brings me into that moment very quickly because of the muscle memory or whatever it is. And
There's some skill, or it's a craft that, we learn to engage over perhaps a lifetime.
yeah. So come to church.
Any final thoughts?
Nope, I got none.
I think we're good.
Great. Hey, thanks for listening to us. Just a reminder, next week we are looking at the letter G in Change. We'll be focusing on grace. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. Would love to welcome the moment that we get to open this conversation to everyone face to face and continue the dialogue. And it feels like there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and that's happening. So looking forward to seeing you